There you go. All right. So could you please state your name and where you are currently residing?
My name is Linda Carlino, and I currently live in Hauppauge, New York, on Long
Okay.
Island.
Thanks. All right. So just to start off, um, first general question is, what was school like for you when you were growing up? If you can describe a vivid memory of a classroom that you probably remember, or any memorable teachers, and overall learning environment.
Wow, putting me to the test. Okay, a memorable classroom probably was kindergarten, mostly because we had two kindergarten classes that shared a two-stall bathroom. So it didn't matter a girl, a boy, who was in there, but neither side ever locked, and everybody went in, and it was just I don't know. Even then, it struck me as strange being 5 years old using a bathroom with a boy standing next to you. Um, let's see. That was way back when. And then between my junior year and senior year of high school, my mother moved. So my senior year was spent with a whole bunch of strangers, right when you're supposed to be enjoying your life and celebrating with all your friends. I didn't know anybody.
Mm.
Um, and my senior math class for the final exam, the teacher said either everybody uses a calculator or nobody uses a calculator. And guess who was the one person who forgot their calculator that day? And you weren't allowed to share calculators because you could put the answer in and hand it to someone else, and that would be cheating. So, yeah. But school was school. I did my share of studying. I had fairly good grades until senior math.
So when you moved your senior year, how far was it from your previous school? Like, were you ever able to go visit your old school friends or
I grew up in Brooklyn, and my mom moved to a little town just outside of New Paltz, New York, which was about a 90-mile drive.
Mhm.
So, and of course, it's state, they're public schools, so all the schools had the same days off at the same time. So even if I could come down for a visit, because my mom still had her apartment, school was closed.
Yeah, yeah. So just to branch off of that a little bit, were there any particular subjects or like types of learning that you enjoyed the most? So favorite subjects, and when you were a student, or what did you find challenging or difficult? At least for me, like I knew that I always liked English, like math and I are not friends. I mean, your son can attest to that. I sometimes I'm like, I text him and I'm like, I need help. Um, but yeah, what was your experience with school?
Math was my favorite subject.
Mhm.
I loved it. So when I got that last quarter senior year, it was a little depressing. My least favorite subject, I would have to say, was social studies, and
Yeah.
that still hasn't changed. Don't ask me to identify landmarks or anything, When I go anywhere, it's not a left on whatever street, it's a left at the McDonald's. Okay, don't ask me where towns are or where anything is because I just don't do geography.
No, I agree. There's an ongoing joke between my brother and I whenever we're driving in DC. If I just see a white building, I'm just like, oh my God, the White House. And he's like, no. And I'm
It's
like,
a big building.
I'm like, it's a white building. But it started when I was little and it just now I kind of just do it to mess with him. But no,
Mm.
I feel the same way. And I actually have a friend who growing up, she had a game where she learned all the capitals and it stuck with her and she is intense. And I always try to warn people to not bring it up because she is the most competitive person when it comes to capitals. Um, but she beat, I think, all of our history teachers at BCR except for one.
Mm.
Um, but no, I agree. Um, it's really interesting that you are also a fan of math. When I asked Lenny to help me budget one time, I don't know
Mhm.
that I ever saw him that happy. Um, no, but I always struggled with math. I mean, my brother, I like to joke around that he got the math gene and I got the English gene of like
Okay.
just liking the reading and the writing. And he is more, he always said this, and it's something that stuck with me for a long time was he's like, I like math because there's always one answer. And I was like, and I don't like math because there isn't always one. Like because I like English. I like being able to come up with a different answer.
Right.
Um, but cool. So how did you typically learn growing up? Was it more textbook based, lecture based, hands-on activities, or something else?
Textbook. It was all about the textbook.
Yeah.
You'd read it at home, you'd do your questions at the end of the chapter or the section, you go in the next day and talk about it, and then that night you'd read the next few pages. Everything was textbook back then.
Was it any different, do you think, when you saw Lenny and Vinny growing up? Was it the same, or did you see kind of a difference of less textbook usage?
When they got up towards middle school and high school, I feel there was a lot less textbook because
Yeah,
they just sat in the classroom. The books were under their chairs in their desk, and they never brought them home.
yeah.
Me, on the first day of school, you'd go home with 7 textbooks for all your one for each class.
Something that was always memorable for me that like I don't know that any of my students really know what it is. The book covers, the little book socks that you used to get. I
Oh, see,
remember
yeah.
those. I remember
Well,
those, or I remember it was like a the newspaper or like a paper bag that you could
we
use.
used to use brown paper bags. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember those vividly. Now that we're talking about textbooks, and my mom used to always be like, "Do you really need it?" I was like, yeah, like I have more textbooks this year. Um, but yeah, no, it's interesting that you mentioned that like
Mm.
both of your sons never like really had to take the textbook home. Um, I mean, I'm trying to remember if I don't think I ever took a textbook home in middle school either.
Mm.
Which now that I am learning a little bit more of the foundations of education, um, I guess it makes sense because like school funding wasn't all that great. And so there wasn't room to send kids home with textbooks and then potentially not see them again. Um, or just the quality of textbooks that we had, there was always rips and tears in them. And I guess
Mhm.
I understand my teacher's perspective of like, let's just keep them here. Um, in terms of education, I know that you mentioned that you did your fair share. How did your family view on education growing up shape your view on education?
Well, I had a single mom who worked, so I was kind of on my own. I'd come home, I'd do my homework, and that was about it. If I had questions, it had to wait till the next day till I got back to class. Yeah, there there was little to no support at home, I would say.
Yeah. How did that, do you think that impacted you when you had your kids?
Um, I think it pushed me to try harder to help them when they needed it, knowing that I didn't have that option.
Yeah. I mean,
Although sometimes they didn't want the help, but
yeah.
other times, and Lenny can probably attest to it, like the class would teach the current ways of doing math. And he would say to me, I don't get this. And I'd say, well, when I went to school, we did it this way. And he'd go, why can't they let us do it that way? It's easier.
No, I definitely see that. So my goddaughter's 8,
Hmm.
and she's at a tag school now, and I am helping her with homework when I can. And
Hmm.
she's again, I for one am not good at math. I look at it and I start freaking out. And sometimes she'll be like, "Can you help me with math?" And I'm like, Sure, it's second grade, but how hard can it be? And
Oh.
then she's showing me her little handouts, and I'm like, she sees me do like my little forehead scrunch that I do, and she's like,
Mhm.
she goes, "Is it hard?" And I had the heart to tell her, "Yeah." I'm like, "No," I'm like, just let me figure out what you're doing in X school."
Mhm.
And I'm like, man, it's so different. I mean, even growing up, I mean, my parents, they went to school in Mexico, and so the techniques are very different. I remember
Mhm.
growing up and also struggling with math and them being like, that's Chris. And I was very fortunate of having my brother who was 3 years older than me, who, I mean, things didn't change drastically from when he was in
Mhm.
the same grade than when I was. But yeah, I mean, even looking at Hades' work sometimes, I'm like, huh, why did they do it that way? Like, isn't it easier to do it this way? She had a question the other day that talked about like if Miss Linda had a tree that was like 13 feet tall, and like Lenny had a tree that was 9 feet tall. Like, how much taller is Miss Linda's tree than Lenny's tree? And I like watched her do it, and I even looked at her and I was like, "You do know that you could just do this, right?" And she just kind of looked at me like, "That's not how you do it." I got kind of
Yeah,
offended,
they overcomplicate it
and
these
I
days.
and part of me is like, you know what? I can't say anything because if that's how her little brain works, then why not? I'm like,
Mhm.
if you're understanding math, more power to you. And I kind of joke around with her all the time. I'm like, I'm happy you're good at math because Madrina, which is godmom in Spanish, I'm like, Madrina isn't good at math. And she kind of just giggles. And I don't think she fully understands that it's not a joke. But nice. Looking back, were there any pivotal moments or experiences that shaped your attitude towards education? I know that you talked about um, your childhood influence of your single mom,
Mm.
and then how that portrayed into your parenting with Lenny and Vinny and being really active, even though they might have not wanted to help. Uh, which he's sitting in front of me now, so
Oh, hi. Hi.
do you want the other headphone? Use the other headphone. Um, but yeah, were there any pivotal moments that you think impacted your view on education, not only as a student, but also as a parent?
Um, I don't think so. I did what I had to do and got through, and I tried to get the work ethic into the boys, get home, do your homework, and then the rest of your night is free. Where when I was growing up, it would be Sunday night, 5 minutes before bedtime, and it's like, oh, I forgot to do my homework. You're laughing because he's laughing, right? He heard that,
So
didn't he?
I, I'm laughing. I'm laughing because that was me.
Mhm.
My my grandmother, she passed away when I was a junior in high school, and I mean, she had COPD, so
Mm.
she had COPD, she was type 2 diabetic, um, she had blood pressure problems, and so from a really young age, I was in and out of hospitals translating for my mom. Um,
Mm.
and so the last bit of her life, she was in a rehab facility, um, in hopes of like retraining her lungs to be better. But it came to the point where doctors, kind of looked at us and said, there isn't much that we can do. Um, and so that was in October, 2016. And so come November, they finally discharged her. And I remember the last month of her life, I would just go sit in her room, and there was never a time that she didn't look at me and say, "Did you do your homework?" She and it's really funny because she could forget that she had lunch that day. She could
Mm.
forget what time she woke up. She could forget that. So my grandma had five kids. Um, her fifth child passed away when they were really young. Um, so she could forget that he was no longer with us. But she would
Mm.
never forget to tell me to do my homework. And
It's priorities.
it's priorities. I remember she would look at me and go, "Little baby, did you do your homework? Because if not, your mom's gonna be upset." And I would just, before I could even set my second foot in her room, And I would go, okay. I would just turn back around. It was almost like
Mhm.
I had to do my homework in exchange for time with her. Um,
Okay.
which I can't be mad at. I mean, I again, she passed away when I was a junior in high school, and so when I graduated high school, I mean, I come from an immigrant family where only a few of my cousins had. Um, my brother at the time when I was a freshman in college was a senior in college. So he was the first one to graduate college. And it was in those moments where I was really thankful that she always told me, hey, do your homework. Sometimes when
Hmm.
even now in grad school, when I feel like I'm procrastinating or slacking off, I kind of can hear her voice a little bit, being like, well, you need to do your homework.
A little tap on the
Um,
shoulder.
a little tap on the shoulder. But I will say this, I have known Lenny for about, what would you say, 2 years now? Two and a half? About two and a half.
Mm.
Yeah, two and a half, I would say. Um, and I think you did a pretty good job with instilling that work ethic into him. I mean, that there are times where I look at him and I'll talk to him, I'm like, I have to do this assignment. Can you just sit with me? Because I need somebody to hold me accountable. So, up to you, Miss Linda. I hope to hopefully be a cool mom like you.
Yeah, we
Um,
also have the full other end of the spectrum as far as being professional procrastinators. Yeah.
we've heard saying, yep, that's true. Yeah,
I told him both ways. Get it done at the last possible second.
It gets done.
it
It's
gets
slow to
done.
get done, but it's at the last
It gets done. And
We
and
work better under pressure.
I I said that the other day to him when I had to write my midterm, and I said, and he goes, "Oh, cool. When is it due?" I said, "Tonight." And he goes, "What? But why?" And I said, just let me focus for like an hour and a half, and I'll do it." Um, and I'm guilty of that myself. That sometimes when I look at my kids doing stuff, I'm like, "But you had so much time," and then they look at me like, "Let's get still. But you're ever young like us." And I was like, "Yeah, you're right. I'm sorry."
Mhm.
So it's really funny being a teacher now and like seeing all my students do all the things that I did one time.
Yeah.
I they they laugh at me because when we're taking tests or quizzes, I have them take off any of the Apple Watches, put laptops away, phones away.
Mhm.
Um, and I have two versions of the test, so every other kid gets a different one. And I said that the
You're
first day.
cheating. I like that.
They said that to me. They're like, Miss Castillo, do you have that time? I said, yes, yes, I do. But they were just so cool. And I had a kid at DBCR look at me one day and say, Miss Castillo, you don't want us to succeed. And I went, but I do. This is why I'm
Yeah.
kind of forcing you to take ownership of your own education. Yeah. Um, talking about, you think that's what your mom did to you? I like that. Well, hey, I think your mother raised you right. So as we're talking about pivotal moments, is there a teacher that is memorable for you that really changed your life? I think a lot of the time people talk about that there was always that one teacher. Um, was there a teacher for you? And if so, who was that?
Um, I'm gonna say there was, but not in a good way, because like you, my brother was 3 years older, and he was a troublemaker. Always in the principal's office, always getting, in trouble. And we had the same teacher in sixth grade. So when I got there, she would, oh, you must be John's little sister. And it was always like, I wasn't me. I was his little sister. I was somebody's property. And that just always bothered me that I was never me.
You know, because you and I think live the same life, girl. Because there were so many times where, I mean, even entering high school, everybody's like, "Oh my gosh, your Chris's little sister," and I used to lie and say, "I don't know who that is." and he would get so butthurt. And like, granted, like and I think I am a little bit of the opposite, where Chris, from the moment that he was in kindergarten, was on honor roll, where
Mm.
I know, and granted, I can say this now that I have matured, and then like, I wasn't dumb. I just, it was just a little bit harder for me to get honor roll. Um,
Mhm.
but for so long, I was compared to my sibling, that I have a lot of academic insecurity. Um, and so whenever people would say, "Oh, you're Chris's little sister," immediately I knew that that meant that they expected so much from me, and it
Mhm.
created so much pressure on like little Guadalupe that I really did think that I was dumb for a long time. And even then, like growing up, my brother and I are 3 years apart, so we never argued, but I was in his eyes the annoying little sister. So sometimes they would be like, "Is that your little sister?" And he would say, "No, I don't know her." So when we were younger, he would literally say that he didn't have a sister. So then when we grew
Wow.
up, I kind of flipped the switch and was like, "I don't know who that man is." And they would be like, "But you walked in with him." I said, "Coincidence. We just happened to show up at the same time." Um, but it was just
Wow.
really interesting. And again, I feel that.
Mm.
But I think, yeah, my experience was my teachers looked at me and just were like, "Oh, she's just going to be as great as Chris." And
Mhm.
it took me a long time to realize that I was great in my own way.
That's
Um,
right.
but yeah, no, I feel that, Miss Linda. I do. Um, so you was tell me it's going to cut us off in like 7 minutes, but I think we have time for my other questions. Um, so your son is a teacher. How
Mhm.
does it feel to see him?
Loose definition.
That is not a loose definition of the word. Your son is a teacher. How does it feel to see him in that role? Um, did you expect him to be an educator? And how do you think his experience as a teacher compares to your experience as a student?
Oh, complicated question. Um, as far as being a teacher, he had spoken about it from, I think, fourth grade, but he was going to teach music because he wanted to torture little people.
Is that what you
I
said?
believe I believe was his reasoning. Um,
That's adorable.
because he felt the pain of his music teachers, and he's like, I got to do that to someone else. So pay it forward. I am I am extremely proud of who he has become, and I'm not supposed to pat myself on the back, but I will take a little bit of credit
I think
for
that
it.
you should. I think that you should.
As far as him being a teacher compared to me being a student, I probably would have loved having teachers that were young. Although I'm sure my teachers were young, but because I was so young, I thought they were old.
It happens. I had a student go, "Mr. Seal, are you in your 40s?" the other day. And then
I'm
when I said
sorry.
and I was like, "No, I'm 25," and they're like, "Oh, you're so young." And I said, "I
Mhm.
thanks." Um, no, it's really cool that I got to meet your son in this profession. I tell him all the time that I wish that I would have had him as a teacher when I was growing up. Like I think our students were so lucky to have his insight on his content area. Um, like I have a number of religion teachers who, don't get me wrong, I think we're passionate about what they were teaching, but I think that I see him with our kids, and I mean they love the heck out of him. They
Yeah,
they don't
and I've
they don't,
go ahead.
no, go ahead, you go.
In my day, you didn't have that kind of relationship with your teachers. They were the teachers, you were the students. Everything was, there was a line down the middle and you didn't cross it.
Yeah, no, and I think that that's something that I see a lot in the difference between what education was like growing up as opposed to what education is now. I think that there's a lot more focus towards realizing, oh, students are also just kids.
Hmm.
Which is something that I think Lenny and I have said very often about some of our students who it might be a little bit harder to connect with, but at the end of the day, they're just the kids.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think growing up, there was this expectation that yes, you were a child, but you had to be obedient still, and like that's all that you could be. You came there to learn, and anything in your personal life had to be kind of stored away.
Yep.
Um, but no, I think you should pat yourself on the back, Miss Linda. Are you kidding? Come on. She patted herself on the back. Um, this will be my last question for the sake of Zoom time.
Okay.
But working at Angela's house, an
Mhm.
organization supporting children with complex medical needs. How do you see education playing a role in their life, and how do you think it differs from what most people know about education and children with complex medical needs?
Well, I only work behind the scenes handling all the paperwork, so I don't actually have direct contact with the kids, but I get to read about them through everybody's notes of what they're doing with the kids. I when I went to school in middle school, there were three kids with Down syndrome who had their own separate class. They, like we'd see them in the lunchroom, but that was the only time you saw them. So now that they have these inclusion classes, I think it's a beautiful thing that everybody realizes there are special people out there. When we were kids, it was like they were the oddballs, the exceptions, but now working in the industry, knowing that there are so many of these kids out there and realizing that they're not just one in a million anymore. I think their education is important. I think the fact that they're able to get an education with other children is important so that those children can learn about differences and uniqueness in people.
Isn't it? I think you're one of the coolest people I've ever met in my lifetime. So I just want to go ahead and say thank you for your time. I know that the ending of this interview probably seems really abrupt, but I also don't want to like get cut off. Um, but thank you for your insight. Thank you for your time, and I
Mhm.
and I know that you said that you work behind the scenes with the paperwork, but I
Mhm.
still do think that your contribution to Angela's house is important, and I think that you're allowed to say that like you work with children with complex medical issues. I
Mhm.
mean, because you do. Um, and I really salute you for the work that you do. Even if people think it's just paperwork, I think that you're doing the Lord's work, Miss Linda.
Thank you.
And I think you did with your son here. So yeah, thank you for your time. Any final remarks or things that you would like to share?
Um, I think this is a wonderful program that you're part of, where you have to talk to people about how things changed over the years. And I want to wish you an amazing education on your way to your master's.
Thank you, Miss Linda. I'm probably gonna have Lenny FaceTime you once I end the recording, so he
Yeah,
can say,
Facebook open up.
oh, he already has Facebook open. Well, thank you, Miss Linda.
You're welcome, sweetie. Good night.